Golden State Valkyries got against the Fever, but I don't know what it is. I believe it's Stephanie White play calling, the way she's orchestrating her offense, and defensively, they just can't do nothing at all. I get why she do certain schemes defensively, but at some point you have to talk to Breonna January like, hey, look here, player, this ain't working. And that's exactly what she need to do. Now, with that being said, we have Sophie Cunningham exposing major news about WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert possibly being out the door. Now,
something is happening around the Indiana Fever right now, and the strange part is that the loudest story may not actually be the real story. For weeks, the internet has been filled with claims that Caitlin Clark and Stephanie White are secretly at war, that the Fever coach is deliberately taking the ball out of Clark's hands, that Sophie Cunningham is exposing problems inside the WNBA, and that League Commissioner Kathy Engelbert could eventually be pushed out. Some versions of the story go even further, claiming there was a secret attempt to suspend Clark, that Breonna Stewart publicly turned against White, and that the Fever front office is preparing to make a dramatic coaching change.
Last night,
I watched it from like the fourth quarter.
Sure. So from what you watched, what did you see about what the Wings did when it comes to being able to stop the Fever? Like, did that teach you anything about what you
he said,
I think Dallas had obviously a really solid game plan. They played well against Indy for the whole season, right? Like, they've won the series, Dallas. That's what they said on TV. See, check me out. But I think what they did well defensively was they limited them to one shot, you know? When the ball went up, they made sure that there was a contest, high hand, and then went after. A walk had an amazing game, obviously being a huge rim protector. So we need that kind of presence, and knowing that there's different people on the floor, and you have to guard them like at different lengths. Some you have to be tight, some you have to be off.
Did you watch the Wings game last night?
She said it was the defense that pretty much did that to the Fever. Now, Breonna Stewart is one that has not shied away from unloading on the Indiana Fever. Now, with that being said, moving on to the next part of the video, we have to talk about this Kathy Engelbert situation. I believe this story is bigger than a lot of people think it is. This is very big for the league.
But there is a problem. When you separate the viral claims from what can actually be verified, the picture becomes much more complicated. There absolutely are legitimate questions surrounding Indiana. The Fever have had stretches where their defense looked vulnerable. Their offense has sometimes become predictable. Clark has been visibly frustrated at times. Cunningham has become one of the league's most outspoken personalities. Engelbert is facing unusually intense criticism. And the WNBA itself is dealing with an unprecedented wave of attention, much of it surrounding Clark and the cultural arguments that now follow the league everywhere. But the evidence does not establish that White is secretly plotting against Clark or that the Fever organization has already decided to fire her. In fact, the most recent evidence points in a very different direction. Clark and White have continued appearing together publicly, Indiana has continued winning important games, and the Fever's official media channels are still featuring White alongside Clark and other key players. So the real question is not whether there is a secret conspiracy inside Indiana. The more interesting question is why so many people have become convinced there must be one. And once you look closely at what has happened over the last several weeks, the answer becomes much easier to understand. The first thing that needs to be addressed is the Dallas storyline, because that is where much of the criticism against Stephanie White gained momentum. The competitor transcript describes the Fever's loss to Dallas as a coaching disaster and uses it as evidence that White is incapable of adjusting against the Wings.
Horrible, unwatchable basketball. I said last night was in the top 3 hardest games to watch of the season. It was brutal. God dog, last night was boring. In fact, I said last night during the watch party that only the WNBA could have a battle between what's supposed to be 2 of their top 5 biggest stars, Paige Beckers and Caitlin Clark. Only in the W could the WNBA figure out how to take a game like that, make it close for most of the game, and it be boring as hell. That's some W shit. That happens a lot in this league. A lot in this league. Vanderbilt fever. Caitlin White literally got tackled. Stephanie White just sits there with her arms crossed, sniffing and twitching. Congratulations, Stephanie Weatherspoon. Aw, damn. Shout out Teresa Weatherspoon. Whoa. Lethargic performance. That's on the coach. I mean, that's just all there is to it. Stephanie White, rhythm-killing circle the wagons offense. God. Just make one more pass. I dare you. Make one more pass. You all need a new coach, just saying. You simply can't just drive to the hoop every offensive play.
There is certainly something to examine there. Dallas has repeatedly challenged Indiana this season, and the matchup has exposed some of the Fever's weaknesses. But saying Dallas has caused problems is very different from saying White deliberately sabotaged her own team. The season series itself tells a much more complicated story. Dallas defeated Indiana 107-104 in the season opener, a game where the Fever had opportunities but ultimately could not close it out. Later, Indiana responded with a convincing 98-82 victory over Dallas on August 14th. That game is particularly important because it directly contradicts the idea that White simply cannot figure out the wings. The Fever entered the fourth quarter trailing 66-63, then completely changed the momentum with a 16-5 run to open the final period. Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston both recorded double-doubles, Kelsey Mitchell scored 23 points, and Indiana finished the game with a 98-82 win. That does not mean every coaching decision was perfect. It means the reality is more nuanced than the viral narrative. A coach can make questionable decisions in one game and still make successful adjustments in another. A team can have an offensive problem without the coach secretly trying to suppress its best player. And that distinction matters because once the Stephanie White hates Caitlin Clark narrative takes hold, every tactical decision begins to look suspicious. That is exactly what happened with Clark's role in the offense. Critics have repeatedly complained that Indiana does not use her aggressively enough as a primary pick-and-roll creator, especially when defenses begin forcing the ball out of her hands. Some fans have pointed out that opponents are increasingly willing to trap Clark, deny her catches, and make other Fever players initiate possessions.
Now, shout out to Patrick Benadavid because he spoke a lot and reacted to what Sophie Cunningham said about Kathy Future in the league. Let's listen to
Sophie
Patrick.
Cunningham hints at WNBA commissioner shakeup as she goes after Kathy Engelbert. I do feel like as a whole that could be a position that's maybe open at the end of the year. What are you talking
Boom,
about?
told you.
That means the commissioner positions may be open at the end of the year. She added, Kathy Engelbert's done a lot of good things, but with where our league is trying to go, I feel like you just want someone who also wants that. That's up to the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, at the end of the day. Sophie Cunningham is calling out directly saying, Adam, at the end of the day, you're the top brass. You got to make a decision.
I was thinking about this the other day, and it's almost as if this was a plan, Tom, like an attempt to bring some attention to a sport. Yes, they're making the money, but it's just unwatchable. Look at the attention, guys. This is, I think, what, the fourth week we're talking about it. We have so many issues that we talk about. They're bringing this, they're doing that, transgenders this, all this type of situation.
Yeah.
I think this might be a real, purposeful ploy to bring people and eyeballs and everything. And you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if they actually let some biological men come on that court, because at least it would make it watchable. I tried, I'm not even joking, I tried to watch a couple of minutes, and just watching, what's her name? Reese? What's her name?
Angel Reese.
Angel Reese laying up. It's
Some
such.
people called her, she's good. She's like the Jordan of.
Yeah, the Jordan. I think it was Ari Spears. He said something like she looked like a baby giraffe trying to stand. Like, you know, they can't even move. I think it's just all a ploy because it's unwatchable. But it's like the attention that they're trying to get is unbelievable. But I respect Sophie Cunningham because, Tom, what's the word that you said?
Authentic and fair.
And there's two words too. I'm gonna add on top of that. Common sense.
Ooh. That was Patrick Benadavid.
That criticism is not completely unreasonable. Clark is one of the most dynamic offensive creators in the league, and when a defense removes her from the action, Indiana can look much less dangerous. Even online fever discussions have focused on the frustration of seeing opposing defenses take Clark out of the game early and force everyone else to beat them. But there is another side to this. If every team knows Clark is the center of Indiana's offense, then defenses are naturally going to design their game plans around stopping her. The coaching challenge is not simply give Caitlin the ball. It is figuring out how to create situations where defenses cannot take her away without opening something else. Sometimes that means Clark initiates. Sometimes it means she works off the ball. Sometimes the ball goes through Kelsey Mitchell. Sometimes Aaliyah Boston becomes the interior hub. Sometimes Indiana needs another guard to attack the second side of the defense. Calling every possession where Clark does not touch the ball a deliberate attempt to freeze her is therefore too simplistic. The real issue is whether Indiana is consistently creating efficient opportunities for its best players. That is a basketball question, not proof of a hidden agenda. And there is another detail the competitor version leaves out. Caitlin Clark herself has not publicly supported the idea that Stephanie White is secretly trying to destroy her career. In fact, Clark has repeatedly pushed back against the idea that their moments of visible frustration represent a personal feud. Earlier in the season, when a heated interaction between Clark and White went viral, Clark explained that the two are both competitive and that she had White's back. That matters because the most sensational version of this story requires Clark to be secretly fighting her own coach, but the person supposedly at the center of that conflict has not publicly confirmed that interpretation. Instead, the available evidence shows Clark and White continuing to work together. As recently as August 26th, the Fever's official media listings featured White alongside Clark and other members of the team, while post-game and practice appearances throughout August continued to show the coach and star player operating together. That doesn't mean everything inside a locker room is perfect. No professional team is free of disagreements. Players and coaches will argue. They will challenge each other. They will have different opinions about tactics. But disagreement is not the same thing as sabotage. And when a story depends on a secret motive, the burden of proof has to be much higher than a frustrated facial expression or a viral clip. That distinction becomes even more important because Caitlin Clark is not an ordinary player anymore. She is one of the biggest stars in the entire WNBA, and almost everything surrounding the Fever is magnified because of her presence. The Fever's games attract extraordinary attention. Her performances generate headlines. Her interactions with teammates and opponents become social media content. Even a routine argument between Clark and a coach can be analyzed by millions of people who have never watched another Fever game. That creates an unusual environment for Stephanie White. If she calls a play that does not involve Clark, some fans interpret it as disrespect. If she runs the offense through Clark repeatedly and the defense adjusts, critics accuse her of being predictable. If she gives another player a bigger role, some fans ask why Clark is being ignored. If she gives Clark more freedom, critics can argue that the offense has become too dependent on one player. In other words, the coach is operating in a situation where almost every decision has an interpretation attached to it. That does not mean White deserves immunity from criticism. It means criticism should be based on actual basketball outcomes rather than assumed motives. And the basketball evidence gives us plenty to discuss without inventing a secret war. Indiana's offense has been one of the most impressive units in the league, particularly when Clark and Kelsey Mitchell are both creating at a high level. Recent league analysis has described the Fever as having a historic offense while also identifying their defense as a major weakness. That is a fascinating contradiction. If the Fever were truly being destroyed by a coach who had no idea how to use her players, it would be difficult to explain how the team developed one of the league's most productive offenses. But if the offense is elite while the defense remains vulnerable, suddenly the coaching conversation changes.
Sophie Cunningham, because Tom, what's the word that you said?
Authentic and fair.
And there's two words too I'm going to add on top of that. Common sense.
Ooh. That was Patrick David. Now, this is what Fox is saying.
Silence for advocating for women's sports. Furthermore, the WNBA and its partners may have exposed themselves to a legal liability by censoring fans' viewpoints. Your first reaction to this, Kaylee?
Well, I think they're absolutely right. You know, to Sophie's point about the lack of leadership in the league right now, it really seems like leadership in the league, whether it's Engelbert or other officials involved, are too cowardly to take out their frustration with Sophie directly. So they're taking out their frustrations on her fans instead, whether that's making them cover up their XXXY shirts or making them take down posters in support of Sophie Cunningham at some of these games. It's completely inappropriate because theirs are the only viewpoints that are being silenced by the league right now. And, you know, I hope that the lesson that some of the other WNBA players or even female athletes in general take from this entire saga and from Sophie's example is that there's no point in trying to be neutral on this issue. We think about Caitlin Clark. Look, I get it. She doesn't want to wade into what she believes is a cultural debate. She wants to focus on playing the game instead. But has that made the players who directly target her every single time that she enters the court, has that made them any more nice to her on the court? Has that made her be targeted even less? Has it made the league officials more willing to publicly defend her? No, she's still getting the exact same treatment as before. So you might as well find the courage of conviction here and do the right thing.
Yeah, and look, I know it Independent Women features your leadership, and I'm wondering if there are other women across the country and consortiums like that who are ready to come out and join Sophie Cunningham very publicly. Your last quick thought, we'll move forward.
Yeah, I mean, female athletes are involved in this debate whether they want to be or not, because the central question is whether we as women have the right to our own distinct spaces in sports teams. So good for Sophie for speaking up, and I hope others will join her.
And the irony of that, Kaylee, we were told for so long as a country, women in this country, including...
The question becomes whether Indiana has enough defensive personnel, whether rotations are consistent enough, whether the team can protect the paint, and whether its offensive success is being undermined by giving opponents too many easy possessions. Those are real problems. They are also fixable problems, and they are much more useful to analyze than simply declaring that the coach is jealous of her superstar. Then there is Sophie Cunningham, whose role in this entire story has become increasingly fascinating. Cunningham has become one of the Fever's most recognizable personalities, not simply because of what she does on the court, but because she is willing to speak openly about issues that other athletes might avoid. Her comments have made her a target for criticism from some parts of the WNBA audience, while making her extremely popular with others. That has transformed her into something bigger than a role player. She has become part of the league's broader cultural conversation, and that is where Cathy Engelbert enters the story. The competitor transcript portrays Cunningham's comments about Engelbert as evidence that the commissioner is about to be removed. That goes too far. What Cunningham actually did was question whether Engelbert is the right person to lead the league through its next stage of growth. In an interview, Cunningham argued that the WNBA needs someone bold and confident who puts the players and the league first. That is criticism. It is significant criticism, but it is not the same thing as announcing that Engelbert is being fired. There is currently no verified evidence that the commissioner has been removed or that a decision has been made to replace her. Still, Cunningham's comments are worth paying attention to because they reveal something important about the WNBA's current moment. The league has grown dramatically, and that growth has created expectations that did not exist on the same scale before. Players now have much larger audiences. The business is attracting more money. The television audience is expanding. Franchise values are rising. Salaries are changing. New teams are coming. And with all of that growth, players increasingly expect the league office to operate at the same speed. The Atlantic recently described the WNBA's current period as one of unprecedented growth, while also pointing out how cultural and political controversies have intensified around that success. That is the environment Engelbert is operating in. She is not simply managing a basketball competition anymore. She is managing a rapidly expanding sports and entertainment property while dealing with disputes over player treatment, officiating, politics, social media, and the league's identity. Cunningham's criticism therefore matters, even if it does not mean Engelbert is about to lose her job. And Engelbert has responded. In August, as the controversy surrounding the league's politics and transgender participation intensified, Engelbert said that people were trying to use the WNBA to sow divisiveness and described the league as becoming the center of political football for people who, in her view, had never watched or covered the WNBA before. That statement tells you something about how the league office sees the current situation. Engelbert does not appear to believe the WNBA should allow outside political battles to define it. At the same time, the league cannot simply ignore those controversies because they are now directly affecting players, fans, and the public perception of the sport. Cunningham's comments about transgender participation have already generated national attention, demonstrations outside games, and fierce debate. The WNBA has acknowledged that the issue is being discussed, and Engelbert has said player eligibility rules are collectively bargained and that the league's priority is maintaining fair competition and the integrity of the game. So when Cunningham criticizes the commissioner, she is entering a conversation that has already become much bigger than one player or one team. That is where the competitor's story starts blending several different controversies together. It takes the Fever's coaching questions, Cunningham's political comments, Engelbert's leadership, Caitlin Clark's popularity, and the WNBA's cultural battles and presents them as evidence of one giant internal collapse. The reality is more complicated. These issues overlap because the Fever are one of the league's most visible teams, but that does not mean they have one common cause. A defensive breakdown is not automatically connected to a political controversy. A player's disagreement with the commissioner is not evidence that the coach is sabotaging a superstar. A heated exchange between Clark and White is not proof of a secret locker room rebellion. And a player speaking publicly about league leadership does not mean the commissioner is about to be fired. The temptation to connect everything is understandable because it creates a powerful story. But the more interesting story is actually what happens when all these separate pressures land on the same franchise at the same time. Because Indiana has become the center of the WNBA's attention whether the organization asked for that role or not. Clark brings the spotlight. Cunningham brings controversy. Kelsey Mitchell brings elite scoring. Aaliyah Boston brings another star-level presence. Stephanie White is responsible for turning all of that talent into a functioning team. That is an enormous challenge, and it means the Fever are going to be judged differently from almost everyone else. A normal 20-point win can become a national discussion. A close loss can become evidence of dysfunction. A player laughing during a press conference can be interpreted as proof that the locker room is unhappy. A coach crossing her arms on the sideline can become a viral clip with thousands of people claiming to know what she is thinking. That is not a healthy way to evaluate a professional team, but it is the environment Indiana is operating in. The competitor transcript repeatedly uses clips of players smiling after losses as evidence that something must be wrong. But this is one of those situations where body language can be incredibly misleading. Athletes smile in press conferences for dozens of reasons. They can be disappointed about a result while still being happy for a teammate. They can laugh because a reporter asked an awkward question. They can smile because they are trying to maintain professionalism. They can even be furious internally while appearing completely calm externally. Unless a player actually says there is a locker room problem, a smile is not proof of one. The same applies to Clark. If she looks frustrated on the bench, that does not prove she hates her coach. If White looks frustrated, that does not prove she is plotting against her player. Professional basketball is emotional. Players and coaches will disagree. The important question is whether those disagreements affect performance over time. So far, the results do not support the idea of total collapse. Indiana has continued to win games. On August 14th, the Fever beat Dallas 98-82 after trailing entering the fourth quarter. On August 17th, they beat Atlanta 95-91 in overtime. On August 19th, they defeated Toronto. On August 23rd, they competed against New York. And on August 24th, Clark produced a huge performance against Chicago, scoring 37 points and adding 10 assists, while Kelsey Mitchell scored 30. The Fever's own official coverage shows Clark, Mitchell, and Boston continuing to produce at a high level, while White remains the head coach. A team experiencing a real internal collapse can still win games, of course. But the evidence does not resemble the dramatic, everything is falling apart story being sold online. There is another major reason the White versus Clark theory should be treated cautiously: Clark's own recent production. When a coach supposedly wants to silence a superstar, one would expect that superstars' opportunities to consistently decline. But Clark has continued to have enormous offensive responsibility. The official Fever records show her producing 37 points and 10 assists against Chicago, while also appearing in post-game media alongside White and teammates. That doesn't prove every tactical decision is correct. It does, however, make the idea of a systematic campaign to suppress Clark much harder to support. The simplest explanation is usually the strongest one. Indiana's coaching staff is trying to balance Clark's extraordinary offensive abilities with the fact that opponents are building their entire defensive strategy around stopping her. And opponents have every reason to do that. Clark is now ranked among the very best players in the league, and current ESPN rankings place her 3rd overall behind Aja Wilson and ahead of numerous established stars. When you become that important, defenses are going to throw everything at you. They will deny your catches. They will force the ball out of your hands. They will send help early. They will make someone else beat them. That is not necessarily evidence that the coach has abandoned you. It is evidence that the opposing coach understands how dangerous you are. The counter to that is what Indiana must figure out. If Clark is trapped, can Boston punish the interior? Can Mitchell exploit a closeout? Can another guard attack the second defender? Can Indiana create movement that forces the defense to choose between Clark and someone else? Those are the tactical questions that could determine whether the Fever are a championship contender. And this is where the coaching criticism becomes legitimate again. A coach does not get a free pass simply because online accusations are exaggerated. If opponents consistently remove Clark from the first action and Indiana fails to generate efficient alternatives, White deserves scrutiny. If the defense repeatedly gives up easy drives, offensive rebounds, or open perimeter looks, the coaching staff deserves questions. If rotations consistently leave the team vulnerable, fans are allowed to criticize them. But there is a huge difference between saying, White needs to fix these problems, and saying, White is intentionally sabotaging Clark because of jealousy. The first is basketball analysis. The second is a serious allegation requiring evidence. The competitor transcript repeatedly crosses that line. That same problem appears with the alleged secret suspension. The transcript claims White went to upper management and demanded that Clark be suspended for detrimental conduct. It then claims the story leaked caused an explosion around the league, forced the front office to panic, and eventually destroyed White's credibility. But there is no credible reporting establishing that sequence of events. More importantly, recent official Fever coverage shows White continuing to work publicly with Clark through late August. If such a dramatic internal conflict had genuinely reached the point of a formal suspension demand and locker room rebellion, it would be a major story requiring credible sourcing. Instead, the claim largely exists inside the viral narrative. That does not mean private disagreements never happen. They obviously can. It means viewers should not be told that an alleged private event is a confirmed fact without evidence. The same goes for the supposed Breanna Stewart bombshell. The competitor transcript attributes an explosive statement to Stewart in which she supposedly called White's coaching a disgrace and accused her of threatening a generational talent. There is no reliable evidence establishing that Stewart made that statement. That is important because Stewart is not some random commentator whose words would disappear into the internet. She is one of the biggest names in women's basketball, a multiple-time champion and MVP, and her comments about another team's superstar and coach would receive enormous attention. Current coverage instead shows Stewart continuing to be one of the central figures for the New York Liberty and the broader women's basketball world. She was also selected for the 2026 USA Basketball Women's World Cup roster alongside Clark and other major WNBA stars. If Stewart had publicly delivered the supposed attack described in the transcript, that would be independently verifiable. It isn't. That doesn't make the underlying question about Indiana's coaching irrelevant. It makes it more interesting. Because once you remove the fictional or unsupported pieces, what remains is still a compelling story. Indiana has a superstar who changes the way opponents defend. It has an elite scoring guard in Mitchell. It has Boston as a major frontcourt piece. It has Cunningham bringing energy and personality. It has a coach trying to organize all of those pieces while the entire basketball world is watching. And the team has legitimate weaknesses. The current championship analysis specifically identifies Indiana's historic offensive potential while pointing to defensive concerns. That is the real tension. The Fever do not need a conspiracy to be fascinating. They simply need to solve a difficult basketball problem. Then there is the issue of Cunningham and Engelbert, which may actually be the most consequential part of this entire story. Cunningham has openly questioned whether the current commissioner is the right person to guide the league through its next stage. Engelbert has responded to the broader controversy by defending the league's direction and criticizing efforts to turn the WNBA into a political battlefield. Those positions are fundamentally different. Cunningham wants bold leadership that she believes will prioritize players. Engelbert is emphasizing the league's growth, collective bargaining structure, and the need to prevent outside forces from using the WNBA to sow division. Neither statement proves that the commissioner is about to leave, but together they demonstrate something the league cannot ignore. Some of its players believe the league office needs to change how it communicates with athletes and handles controversy. And Engelbert has faced criticism before this current controversy. The debate surrounding officiating, player treatment, and the league's relationship with its athletes has been building for years. Recent commentary has argued that Engelbert has successfully helped guide the WNBA through major growth, while also facing criticism over player relations and the league's handling of online abuse and officiating. That makes Cunningham's comments part of a much longer conversation rather than an isolated attack. The question is whether the league can evolve fast enough to match its growth. A commissioner who was effective during a smaller, more contained WNBA may face completely different challenges when every decision becomes a national headline. And that is where Caitlin Clark changes the equation yet again. Clark's arrival did not create every problem in the WNBA, but it dramatically increased the number of people watching those problems. Suddenly, officiating decisions that previously might have been debated by a relatively small group of dedicated fans were being analyzed by enormous audiences. Every physical play involving Clark could become a national conversation. Every controversy around a teammate could become part of the Fever narrative. The league's traditional audience and its new audience were colliding. Some longtime fans embraced the growth. Others worried that the sport's identity was being overwhelmed by outside narratives. And some new fans came primarily because of Clark and expected the league to operate at the same level of visibility and professionalism as the NBA. That tension explains why the current WNBA environment feels so explosive. A recent Atlantic analysis described the league as undergoing unprecedented growth while simultaneously experiencing intense cultural and political conflict. The WNBA is no longer simply competing for attention against other women's sports. It is becoming a major part of the wider American sports conversation. That means people who never watched the league before are suddenly discussing its players, rules, and leadership. Some of those conversations are informed. Others are not. Some are genuine criticism. Others are driven by political agendas. Engelbert's complaint about people using the league to sow divisiveness reflects that reality. The result is an environment where the Indiana Fever can become the center of a national argument, even when the players are simply trying to win a basketball game. Cunningham's comments can become political news. Clark's frustration can become evidence of a supposed feud. White's coaching decision can become evidence of jealousy. A technical foul can become proof of favoritism, and a loss can become a supposed locker room crisis. That is an extraordinary amount of noise for one team to handle, yet the players themselves continue to play. Clark continues to produce. Mitchell continues to score. Boston continues to anchor the front court. Cunningham continues to bring energy. White continues to coach. The Fever continue to prepare for games. And that contrast between the internet narrative and the actual routine of professional basketball may be the most revealing part of the entire story. Consider Clark's relationship with White again. If there were truly an open war between them, it would be difficult to explain the repeated public appearances together. The Fever's official media pages continue to feature Clark and White in post-game and practice settings, including as recently as August 26th. That does not mean they agree on everything. It means the public evidence does not support the idea that their relationship has completely collapsed. In professional sports, a coach can challenge a player while still respecting them. A player can be frustrated with a coach while still believing in the team's goals. Competitive tension is not necessarily dysfunction. Sometimes it is simply part of trying to win. And that is probably the most important distinction for anyone watching The Fever right now. Do not confuse tension with hatred. Do not confuse criticism with conspiracy. Do not confuse a bad tactical decision with sabotage. And do not confuse a player's public opinion about the league with an official league decision. These distinctions might make the story less sensational, but they make it much more credible. The same principle applies to the rumors surrounding Engelbert's future. Cunningham's comments have certainly created conversation. Other critics have questioned the commissioner's leadership. Political controversy has put enormous pressure on the league office. But none of that means the commissioner is out the door. As of now, that remains speculation. What is verified is that Engelbert is still serving as commissioner, still making public statements about the league's direction, and still dealing with an extraordinary period of controversy and growth. The interesting question is what happens if the pressure continues? Does the league respond by changing its communication strategy? Does it strengthen its player relations structure? Does it make clearer public policies on contentious issues? Or does it continue trying to keep the focus on basketball and business while outside debates rage around it? Cunningham's influence makes that question even more interesting because she has shown that she is willing to challenge the league publicly. Her comments about Engelbert were not simply random social media speculation. She gave a reason for her criticism, so she believes the league needs bold leadership focused on the players as the WNBA expands. Whether fans agree with her or not, that is a legitimate opinion from an active player. The league has to decide how to respond to those opinions without turning every disagreement into a personal war. And there is a broader issue underneath all of this. The WNBA is trying to grow without losing control of its identity. That is harder than it sounds. The league has spent years building a culture around its players, its history, and its values. Now millions of new viewers are entering the conversation, and some arrive with completely different expectations. Some want more physical basketball. Some want more entertainment. Some want fewer political discussions. Some want the league to take stronger political positions. Some want the league to focus entirely on basketball. There is no way to satisfy everyone. Engelbert's challenge is to determine which disagreements can be accommodated and which principles cannot be compromised. For the Fever, the solution is much simpler. Win basketball games. Winning will not eliminate every controversy, but it makes the conversation harder to dominate with speculation. When Clark drops 37 points and 10 assists, the story becomes basketball. When Mitchell scores 30, the story becomes basketball. When Boston controls the paint, the story becomes basketball. When the team closes a game with a massive fourth-quarter run against Dallas, the story becomes basketball. The more the Fever can consistently perform at that level, the less oxygen there is for narratives about dysfunction. But if the defense continues struggling, if late-game execution breaks down, and if Clark is repeatedly forced into difficult possessions, then White will deserve serious scrutiny. That is not because she secretly hates Clark. It is because coaches are judged by results. The Fever have enough talent to be taken seriously, and that creates expectations. White's job is to maximize that talent. If Indiana falls short, questions about her rotations, schemes, and adjustments are completely fair. The same standard should apply to Clark. She is the face of the franchise, but that does not mean every possession has to run through her. Great teams are not built around one player doing everything. Clark's best basketball may actually come when Indiana can make defenses choose between stopping her, Mitchell, Boston, and the other shooters. The coaching staff's job is to create those choices. If they can do that, Indiana becomes incredibly difficult to defend. If they cannot, opponents will continue taking Clark out of the first action and forcing someone else to beat them. That is why the Dallas matchup is so revealing. The Wings have already shown that they can make Indiana uncomfortable. The Fever have also shown that they can adjust and beat Dallas convincingly. Then Dallas came back and won again, snapping Indiana's 5-game winning streak in a 91-85 game where Clark had 9 assists, Mitchell scored 37, and Paige Buchers became involved in a heated exchange with Clark. That game tells us much more than the competitors' claim that White is simply incompetent. It shows two talented teams repeatedly adjusting to each other, with the margins sometimes coming down to execution and defense. And that heated Clark-Bjuckers exchange adds another layer to the story. When two major young stars compete against each other, emotions are going to rise. The fact that Bjuckers and Clark exchanged words does not mean the league is collapsing. It means the competition is becoming more intense. Bjuckers even received a technical later in the game after arguing another call involving Clark. Those moments are part of sports. The danger is when every emotional interaction gets interpreted as evidence of a much larger personal or political conflict. This is the point where the story returns to the biggest misconception surrounding Clark, that every difficult moment she experiences must be part of a coordinated effort to stop her. Sometimes opponents simply want to beat her. Sometimes they will defend her aggressively. Sometimes officials will make mistakes. Sometimes teammates will make mistakes. Sometimes coaches will make decisions Clark does not like. None of those things automatically mean the league is against her. In fact, the existence of resistance is part of what makes her rise interesting. Shaquille O'Neal's rite of passage argument is compelling precisely because great athletes are often judged by how they respond when everyone knows they are coming. But the league still has a responsibility. Physicality should not become an excuse for reckless play. Officiating should not become so inconsistent that players stop knowing what will be called. And social media controversies should not be allowed to replace actual evidence. Those three principles matter because the WNBA is now too visible for confusion to remain harmless. The biggest danger is not that fans criticize the league. Criticism is normal. The danger is that the audience loses the ability to distinguish between criticism and misinformation. Once an unverified claim is repeated enough times, it begins to feel true. A rumor about White becomes White tried to suspend Clark. A comment about Engelbert becomes Engelbert is getting fired. A disagreement becomes the locker room has turned against the coach. A viral quote becomes Breanna Stewart exposed the entire organization. Eventually, nobody remembers where the original claim came from. They only remember that they heard it somewhere. That is exactly why this story needs to be told differently. The real situation is already dramatic enough. The Fever are one of the most watched teams in women's basketball. Clark is one of the sport's biggest stars. The team has elite offensive talent and legitimate defensive concerns. White is under enormous pressure because expectations are enormous. Cunningham is openly challenging aspects of league leadership. Engelbert is dealing with cultural and political controversy. And the entire WNBA is growing faster than ever while trying to maintain control over its identity. None of that needs invented leaks. So what happens next? For Indiana, the immediate test is basketball. Can White build a defense capable of matching the team's offense? Can Clark continue operating as a primary creator without allowing opponents to completely remove her from possessions? Can Mitchell's scoring remain consistent? Can Boston provide enough interior production and defensive stability? Can the supporting cast make defenses pay when Clark is trapped? Those questions will determine Indiana's postseason ceiling much more than a viral TikTok claiming the coach secretly wants Clark gone. For Cunningham, the question is whether her willingness to speak out will continue making her one of the most recognizable personalities in the league. She has already become a major figure in the current cultural debate, and her comments about Engelbert have added another layer to that reputation. But with that visibility comes responsibility. Every statement she makes will be analyzed far beyond the basketball court. For Engelbert, the challenge is even larger. She has to lead a league experiencing enormous commercial growth while navigating disagreements among players, fans, media, and political groups. The controversy over transgender participation has already become a national issue, with Engelbert saying the league will continue discussing the subject while emphasizing collective bargaining and fair competition. At the same time, players such as Cunningham are questioning whether league leadership is bold enough. That tension is not going away simply because one game ends. And for Clark, the biggest challenge may be learning how to exist at the center of a league that is increasingly built around her visibility. She cannot control every headline. She cannot control every foul. She cannot control every criticism. What she can control is her basketball. And when she plays at the level we have already seen, she makes the rest of the conversation much easier to ignore. That may ultimately be the most powerful answer to everything happening around the Fever. Not a leaked document, not a dramatic press conference statement, not a supposed secret feud, not a social media war. Basketball. Because the more you look at the actual evidence, the more the supposed Caitlin Clark versus Stephanie White war starts to look less like a confirmed reality and more like an internet narrative built from small moments of frustration, tactical disagreements, and viral clips. That doesn't mean White is beyond criticism. Far from it. If Indiana fails to reach its potential, her coaching will deserve examination. But criticism should be based on what she actually does, not on motives that nobody has proven. And the same goes for Engelbert. Cunningham has every right to question the commissioner's leadership. Fans have every right to debate whether the league office is handling its explosive growth correctly. But saying Cunningham thinks the league needs a bolder commissioner is very different from saying the commissioner has been fired. One is a verified opinion. The other is speculation. That distinction might seem small, but in the modern WNBA, it is everything. Because this league has reached a point where the truth can travel almost as quickly as the rumor. The Fever can lose one game, and the internet will declare the franchise broken. Clark can argue with a coach, and people will declare a feud. Cunningham can criticize league leadership, and people will predict a commissioner replacement. A superstar can exchange words with an opponent, and people will turn it into a cultural war. That is the world the WNBA now occupies. And perhaps that is the real story nobody saw coming. Caitlin Clark did not simply bring more attention to the Fever. She helped bring a completely different level of scrutiny to the entire league. Every weakness is now visible. Every controversy is amplified. Every disagreement becomes content. Every decision is examined by people who may have never watched the WNBA before. That can be dangerous, but it can also be an opportunity. If Indiana fixes its defense, improves its late-game execution, and finds the right balance between Clark's creativity and the rest of the roster, the current criticism will eventually look very different. If White proves that she can maximize the talent around Clark, the narrative about their supposed feud will lose credibility. If Cunningham continues speaking openly while remaining productive on the court, she may become one of the league's most influential personalities. And if Engelbert can guide the WNBA through this unprecedented period without allowing politics and controversy to overwhelm the basketball, her leadership will ultimately be judged by what the league becomes on the other side. But if the Fever fail, the questions will only get louder. Was the offense too predictable? Were the defensive problems never properly solved? Did Indiana waste opportunities with one of the most talented offensive cores in the league? Did the pressure surrounding Clark become too much for the organization? Those are questions worth asking. What is not worth doing is inventing answers before the evidence exists. The competitor's version of this story wanted you to believe that Stephanie White had already been exposed, that Caitlin Clark had delivered a career-ending ultimatum, that Breanna Stewart had publicly destroyed the coach, and that the Fever front office was preparing termination papers. The available evidence does not support that dramatic sequence. What it does support is something more complicated and, in many ways, more fascinating. Indiana is trying to win under an extraordinary level of scrutiny while its biggest star, one of its most outspoken players, and the league commissioner are all being pulled into conversations that go far beyond basketball. And that is why the next few weeks could be so important. If Indiana keeps winning, the story changes. If Clark keeps producing, the story changes. If White's adjustments continue working, the story changes. If Cunningham's influence grows, the league has to respond. And if Engelbert's leadership comes under even more pressure, the WNBA will have to decide whether its current structure is prepared for the next stage of growth. For now, though, one thing is clear. The Indiana Fever are not simply fighting opponents anymore. They are fighting expectations. They are fighting narratives. They are fighting the weight of having the most recognizable player in women's basketball. And Stephanie White is standing directly in the middle of all of it. Maybe she will ultimately prove the critics right. Maybe she will prove them completely wrong. But the decision should be made on the basketball court, not through anonymous rumors, viral clips, or stories that cannot be verified. Because when the noise finally disappears, the film will still be there. And the film, unlike the internet, does not care what story you wanted to be true.